Hi there, and welcome to our next webinar in our Connected Conservation National Park Service Environmental Justice webinar series. This has been a 10-part series that's taken place over the last couple of months, and this is our last webinar in this series featuring Groundwork. We're really thrilled to have this set of presenters wrapping up our series here. Just as a reminder, we do record all of our webinars and we'll post them on our website following this webinar today, and you can see the rest of the webinars in this series on our site as well. It's just nps.gov/connected conservation, and we'll drop that link in the chat too. Before we get started, we are going to do a Q&A at the end, so feel free to post questions as you have them throughout the presentations today, and then we'll wrap up with that moderated question and answer session at the very end. Okay, well, today we have Groundwork, charting a just and equitable future for urban communities. Environmental justice is the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people in decision-making processes. Environmental justice specifically invests in systems change that repairs the disproportionate burdens placed on low-income communities and communities of color. For 2 decades, the National Park Service has worked with the Environmental Protection Agency and Groundwork USA to support local nonprofits called Groundwork Trust in transforming brownfields and neglected lands and waterways into community assets that improve quality of life. Our webinar today is going to feature Groundwork model and how 2 Groundwork Trusts, Groundwork Jacksonville and Groundwork Ohio River Valley, are advancing a just land use agenda with community residents that includes equitable access to parks, trails, and green space, improved climate resiliency, and opportunities for youth and community development. I'm going to hand it over to Heather Pashier, who's a National Park Service employee, who's our Groundwork Program Manager. Heather?
Yeah, thanks, Cass. It's great being with you today to wrap up the environmental justice webinar series. I know groundwork was certainly a theme in the series. I know it was mentioned a number of times in sessions that NASA developed led on climate resilience, and then in the park environmental justice session where parks are actually looking to have groundwork trusts in their communities working with them on environmental justice issues. So today I'm going to provide a short introduction to our Groundwork program and our partnership, and then hand it over to our partners at Groundwork Ohio River Valley and Groundwork Jacksonville. We're going to give you a deeper dive into their community-based environmental justice work. As Cass mentioned, I'm Heather Pashier. I'm the National Coordinator for the Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program, and I'm also the Groundwork Program Manager. And these 2 programs are very much interconnected. They both further the National Park Service's conservation and outdoor recreation mission in communities. However, Groundwork focuses on urban under-resourced areas, or urban areas that have vacant and contaminated lands known as brownfields, and that lack parks, trails, green space, and potentially lack assets and wealth, leadership opportunities, and support structures. But with that in mind, these are areas that also are rich in community and history. And I always try to keep that in mind when I'm, kind of using deficit-based language. So for Groundwork, we're really aiming to help support environmental and social well-being in neighborhoods by supporting local leaders. And this support is really directed to locally led nonprofit organizations called Groundwork Trusts. And it's the Groundwork Trusts that are working long-term with residents and community partners, including local government, to achieve a healthy, green, and resilient vision. And at the national level, Groundwork Trusts are supported by an innovative partnership between 2 federal agencies and the national nonprofit Groundwork USA. And it's been over, two decades that the Park Service and EPA have worked together on Groundwork. We have quite a partnership. The Office of Brownfields and Land Revitalization provides us with funding to manage the program, and we use the dollars to help create new Groundwork trusts, so new nonprofits in communities We provide them with seed funding, and then we also support the broader network of trusts with ongoing competitive grants, and then also capacity building and organizational development opportunities. And all of this is done in partnership with the national nonprofit Groundwork USA. They have, quite a team of about 15 staff now, and they do, a lot of the day-to-day support of the trust network, particularly for new trusts who are getting established. And, pictured on our screen now is a before and after of Lawrence, Massachusetts. This is the site of our first Groundwork Trust, Groundwork Lawrence. And they've invested pretty heavily in the reuse of vacant mill sites along the Spigot River into the Spigot River Greenway, a trail system with multiple neighborhood parks. And you can just see a little slice of the Greenway Trail in the park on the right. So as I mentioned, the Park Service and EPA have been working together for over 2 decades. The Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program established, the first trust in 1998 and introduced the groundwork model into the United States and around that time. And together, we're really working on transforming brownfield sites. So these are contaminated or potentially contaminated lands into parks, trails, green space, and other community assets. But we're also doing that while addressing other community concerns and more specifically a legacy of racist housing and land use policies, including redlining and urban renewal. So I think, there have been many studies about the benefit of green space, but we also all kind of know this intuitively, that green space benefits our health and our environment. And you can just look at the pictures on the screen. The images on the right, certainly make me feel calmer and more relaxed. And I think if given an option, most of us would choose to have access to more of these type spaces. They, provide, mental and physical benefit. They provide shade in hot areas. They provide some flood assistance and other eco-service benefits. So how did where did the groundwork idea come from? The idea came from the United Kingdom. And our staff, our Rivers Trails Conservation Assistance Program staff, back in the early 90s, were looking for some new models and found this program in the UK and started a partnership with them. And we introduced, this program in the US with their logo and tagline, changing places, changing lives. And in the early days, really enjoyed this nice reciprocal partnership with trusts in the United Kingdom, who helped us get the program established and also provided a nice partnership with the early trusts. Our staff invested kind of heavily in introducing this model in former mill towns and industrial towns in the Northeast and the Midwest. And when I show you a map in a couple slides, you'll see that we do have sort of a heavy concentration of trusts in the Northeast in places, that we're really looking to address environmental and social challenges, places like Lawrence, Massachusetts, Bridgeport, Connecticut, and Providence, Rhode Island. And they knew that they needed, some kind of long-term investment, and it had to include others beyond local government who could be a champion for this work long-term in and with communities. So each Groundwork Trust is really unique and focuses on a set of programs and services that are needed in their communities. And so even though, I mentioned we have, a common tagline and logo, just wanted to underscore that this isn't a cookie cutter approach. But that being said, there are a lot of commonalities. So trusts are working on transforming brownfields into parks, trails, and green space. They're working on providing access to fresh foods through community gardens and urban farms, and partnering with others on food delivery programs. They're also working on urban heat and flooding through green infrastructure and sustainable design projects and programs. And then, lastly, but probably most significantly, they're working to offer youth programs. So their Green Team and Ground Core programs, which engage youth in the transformation of their neighborhoods, but also provides, really important skill building and workforce development opportunities. And a number of the trusts also support youth with wraparound services. So for youth who might be struggling with housing or transportation, or might have, a parent who is incarcerated, they're providing these support services. And I feel like the heading on this slide, "This place is created with you, by you," kind of captures the nature of this type of work, the long-term investment of bringing people to the table. And it also is in the spirit of environmental justice, where all people are included in the decision-making process, and that we invest collectively in systems change that takes, a long-term vision and dedication to this work. The Groundwork Network currently includes, 22 trusts across the country. And again, these are independent nonprofits supported by the national nonprofit partner, Groundwork USA, in partnership with the Park Service and EPA. Our newest trusts are in Mobile, in Kansas City, Kansas, and in Erie. We're currently working with Groundwork Erie to establish their board, and soon they'll be bringing on their new executive director. We, in partnership with Groundwork USA, open the new trust process every few years. It is a competitive process, so we're hoping to have that process open again in late 2023. I'll provide some information in the chat if you want to find out more about what that includes and just kind of track along our timeline. So today we're going to hear from two teams from Groundwork Ohio River Valley and Groundwork Jacksonville. These folks are change makers, leading great work in their communities, leading big, bold projects. At Groundwork Ohio River Valley, we're joined by the co-executive director, Tanner Yes, and Jada Edwards, the Great Parks Green Team program manager. And then at Groundwork Jacksonville, we have the tenacious team of K.E. Haas, Chief Executive Officer, and Gloria McNair, Community Engagement and Equity Manager. And with that, I'm going to hand over the presentation to Tanner and Jada.
Thank you, Heather. Heather has been an amazing champion for the Groundwork Network, so it is a pleasure to be here with her and Groundwork Jax. And hello to those of you tuning in. Many of you we'd like to think of as co-workers, because as Heather mentioned, we're kind of pseudo NPS and EPA colleagues of yours, and at the very least a resource. So thank you again. I'm Tanner Yes with Groundwork Ohio River Valley. We like to say we are where justice and the environment meet, and let's get into that a little bit. Next slide, please. Next slide, please, Heather or Cass, if you're listening. Sweet. Okay, now we're on a roll. I know there's a lot of academics and technocrats out there potentially, but we're going to start by getting into our fields a little bit. You've heard some definitions about environmental justice, but we want to take you on the ground, if you will, and get at a real human level of this. So imagine, if you will, that your connection to nature is not one of splendor, grandeur, peace. It's more of maybe a public health hazard. Potentially your physical connection to nature has been severed by redlining, by freeways, by zoning. Your emotional connection to nature has been severed by stereotypes, by pollution, by agriculture, by slavery. That is the experience for many of our residents, especially people of color in urban areas, and especially and most importantly to me, our youth. So a lot of our work is taking that power back, taking those spaces back, and as Heather mentioned, empowering ourselves and again our youth through the knowledge that their urban landscape, their setting is malleable. So a lot of what we do is kind of that identity work. And in fact, as you can imagine, especially folks of color, regardless of stereotypes, are intimately connected to nature in many ways. Sometimes it takes something like a Green Team Jobs program that we'll talk about to bring that out and bring that back into our families and communities. So a little bit of the social aspect just to begin. Next slide, please. Here's some rationale, not as touchy-feely, but most people are living in cities. The modern environmental movement has left a lot of that diversity behind. And as we know, whether you're talking about transportation, housing, health, climate change is exacerbating all of these issues at a crazy rate. So natural solutions, especially in cities, which are our biggest carbon emitters, need to be paired with social environmental justice, especially in those degraded environments where we can have double wins, if you will, triple wins, if you will, with projects like green infrastructure, like green jobs, which are accomplishing many things at once. Next slide, please.
When we think about climate change, specifically in Cincinnati, it can be reflected in many different areas too. So when you hear climate change, a lot of people think of heat. It gets warmer, right? But there's so much more stuff that's connected to that. So for example, with warmer, moister temperatures, that provides more of a habitat for pests like mosquitoes to nest and lay their eggs. And then that leads to different health issues because we know that mosquitoes can carry diseases. So if you're bitten by a mosquito that carries a disease, then you end up in the hospital and you have to pay different hospital bills. And that can especially be an issue in lower income neighborhoods where people don't have access to hospitals or funding, And another issue with climate change is having like more rates of asthma from warmer temperatures. Another thing is more intense storms. We will have more frequent rain events with climate change, and then that leads to more landslides. In Cincinnati, landslides are very familiar to us, and with more rain events, the ground is wetter and we have more of the roads being blocked off from these landslides, which is also connected to sewer backups. A lot of the Midwest and Cincinnati have combined sewer overflow issues, where when we have these intense rainstorms, the sewers can't hold all of the water from the rain event, as well as us flushing our toilets. So it leads to these backup events where people's basements are flooding. And then all of this is connected to migration because with climate change and the sea levels rising, people will be pushed more inward in the United States. So when you think about it, everything is connected. There's not just, oh, it's getting hotter outside. There's so much more connected to climate change. And we will get more into that later in the presentation. Next slide, please.
Maybe go on to next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Okay, so starting here as a foundation, Jada and I would argue or put a thesis in front of you. Can you be a conservationist? Can you be a sustainability advocate, et cetera, without also being a champion for diversity, equity, inclusion? I think we have an unsustainable sustainability movement, right? Which is why work like this is so crucial. We know the climate science, we have the data, but how is that transferred to the populace? One of the things that we do, in fact, the thread that goes through all our program is really democratizing the data behind this. You heard from NASA Develop earlier in the series. They've been a key partner. Our youth employees are going around the city taking surface temperature readings. We have impervious, pervious surfaces, et cetera. All of this data from NASA, from local and regional GIS mapping, inventory tools goes into how we prioritize our work, where and why we do our work, and of course, layering on the social metrics with that. And I'm going to go pretty quickly, so keep up here through some of the social stuff that I bet you're savvy to most of it, but I want to really highlight how we blend our work together. So next slide, please. Cool. This is an image, a map of the city of Cincinnati. Pretty simple here. This is impervious and compared to tree canopy or non-impervious surfaces. So the green is where trees are or non-impervious surfaces, and the darker areas are where concrete or impervious surfaces are. Next slide, please. We'll put heat vulnerability, surface temperature on that, and you can probably imagine the places where there are fewer trees, the hotter it is. It can vary wildly up to 15 or more degrees in the city of Cincinnati on the same day. And you can potentially imagine the neighborhoods that are cooler compared to the neighborhoods that have higher heat island effect. Those are lower income neighborhoods, often neighborhoods of color. Next slide, please. So at Groundwork, right, we never look at just one factor, just environmental or just social. So here is percent of households in poverty. And of course, you can imagine the compounding effects of that. Next slide, please. And that is by census block. And we've created many indices like this, but this is a heat vulnerability index that layers all of the factors that we just showed you with impervious surface, tree canopy, poverty, and vulnerability. And you get census blocks that have higher vulnerability. The more red they are, the more vulnerable. One of the many ways we prioritize our work and push city government, local policymakers into advocacy and resource allocation through funding or other projects as well. Next slide, please. So that work has kind of been codified now regionally. This is just the front page of the Cincinnati Climate Equity Indicators Report using our climate safe neighborhoods data, which Jada will talk about in a little bit, to have a city published indicators report where every neighborhood is kind of broken down socially and environmentally and socioeconomically as far as vulnerability or opportunities for climate change work. Next slide, please.
So after all of those maps, you might be thinking, what is the solution? What can we do with all of this data? And something we've done at Groundwork Ohio River Valley is kick off some climate safe neighborhood groups. And we formed CAGs, which are climate advisory groups, in 3 different neighborhoods. We kicked off our CAGs in Lower Price Hill. And Lower Price Hill is considered a low-income neighborhood. And we really just wanted to go into the community and talk to them about climate change and what they see fit about doing and how to address climate change in their neighborhood. So Lower Price Hill specifically is extremely industrial. They have over 20 industrial partners. Half of the neighborhood is highly industrial, and then the other half is residential. So what we did with our group in Lower Price Hill was go through a series of 6 different meetings talking about climate change, talking about some of the problems that happen in their neighborhood and how they can address climate change as a neighborhood. And we partner with the city of Cincinnati just to go into what can be done. So a lot of things that were brought up were street trees and having misting bus stops and a green roof. So we at Groundwork were like, what can we do to help the neighborhood and help them get what they want proposed actually in action? As of now, we have planted a few trees in Lower Price Hill specifically with the goal of planting more, which I'll talk about later. And we also have proposed a green roof on Euler School, which is the school that is here in the neighborhood. And in addition to this, we've also hosted climate advisory groups in Bond Hill and Roselawn, 2 other neighborhoods, and we just started another one in the Beacon Corridor. Next slide, please. So in Lower Price Hill, on the graphic on the right, you can see the existing trees in red, which aren't that many for the neighborhood. And then we also have the requested trees in blue. So we have partnered with the city of Cincinnati, and we have planned for all of these trees to be planted and in the ground for this neighborhood. And along with planting trees, we also kicked off an air quality monitoring program. So in the neighborhood, as of last month, we have 12 monitors up and running all throughout the neighborhood in the industrial half and the residential half. They're placed at different businesses throughout the neighborhood, and they are reading the air quality so that we can see how it differs throughout the neighborhood and what we can do to address the problem. Next slide, please. And as Tamara mentioned in the beginning, the youth are our future, and our green team this summer is going to have a little over 80 youth employees, and we're very excited about it. We can't wait to kick it off. It actually starts next Monday. And this is just some statistics from last year's green team. We had 316 trees planted and 96.5 acres of invasive species cleared, which is amazing because honeysuckle is a major problem here in Cincinnati, and our green teams are out on the ground. They're learning about invasive species. They're helping to cut them down. They're doing a lot of environmental work. We're exposing them to trail building and how to plant trees and how to garden. And we're very excited to keep moving forward with the green team this summer. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Jada. So all of this is kind of culminating in a process that we want to make sure that's spelled out for you. Data collection, inventory, and in a very sensitive way, because our neighborhoods have been studied to death. So if we don't have action alongside with planning, then we're doing yet another disservice, to the neighborhoods that we live and work in. These climate advisory groups that Jada mentioned have produced the region's first ever neighborhood level climate resiliency plans that have been adopted by the city. So they actually have teeth within public policy and city adopted plans. Those plans are then used for fundraising successfully for these projects, which we close the loop by connecting our youth green workforce to. So again, just to follow up on some of that, it's the planning, it's the academics, but then it's also the ass kicking, right? So these are the stats from just last year. There were 141 youth employees. We're going to exceed that this coming year for 2022 to 2023. The climate advisory groups and the advocacy and the momentum building there has helped us to convince our local elected officials that this is the type of engagement, not just for green stuff, but citywide, to be going on to reach those most vulnerable. And then when we talk about equity and justice and so forth, you can get as jargony or woke as you would like. But for us, we start with income and opportunity. That's why these programs are pumping money back into the pockets of our families, back into the neighborhoods, because if we're not tying people's economic well-being to green solutions, then there's not an easy way forward to build the advocacy and build the case for these things. So these are just a few of the statistics that come out of our green workforce, which are connected to our policy and our advocacy work, and form a really amazing piece that has been adopted by the city of Cincinnati and jurisdictions around the region, including federal partners here with Fish and Wildlife and the National Park Service. And I think if you go to the next slide, please, Jada and I have our contact info and our website and so forth. But we will pause here and pass to Groundwork Jacksonville.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are excited to share our Emerald Trail project with you today. I'm Kay Ehouse, CEO of Groundwork Jacksonville. I'm going to share a bit about Groundwork Jacksonville's origin, describe the geographic area we work in, give you an overview of our work and our accomplishments over the past 3 years. Next slide, please. As Heather mentioned, Groundwork USA is a national enterprise with a network of local organizations that work to transform the natural and built environment in low-resource urban communities. Each of the 22 trusts within the network were founded by a local government in partnership with local stakeholders. In 2013, a steering committee comprised of City of Jacksonville, Mayor's Office, nonprofits, community and business representatives was formed primarily to respond to the vast need for environmental and community revitalization in the historic Springfield and East Side neighborhoods bordering downtown Jacksonville. Those neighborhoods are in brown and green on the slide. Central to Groundwork Jacksonville's mission is engaging communities as our partners in project planning and design, and in the greater goal of neighborhood revitalization. Everyone deserves a green, healthy, and resilient neighborhood environment. We reach that goal through inclusion, meaningful community engagement, and collaboration. Gloria McNair, Groundwork Jacksonville's Manager of Community Engagement and Equity, will delve into how we do this later in the presentation. Also, every project has additional stakeholders, be it private developers, private property owners, public property owners, or businesses, and without their cooperation, we cannot get the best outcome for the community and the environment. So we have a big tent and a lot of outreach. Next slide. Most of Jacksonville's urban core is a designated brownfield area. The city had struggled for years with cleaning up its urban land and waterways and realized that a Groundwork Trust could provide intentional focus and resources. There are 14 neighborhoods within our geographic footprint, and only 3 are not in a brownfield area. Next slide. So Groundwork Jacksonville's geographic area is the 24 square miles that contain Jacksonville's urban neighborhoods. The area is majority low income, with almost a third living in poverty. 70% of residents are Black. Residents haven't had a seat at the decision-making table historically, and there is a lot of distrust. These neighborhoods have been excluded for decades from most governmental and non-governmental socioeconomic and infrastructure investments. Additionally, the placement of inter and interstate highway systems have negatively impacted many of these historically Black neighborhoods, disconnected communities, decimated parks, and reduced mobility options and access. The purple dotted line is the Emerald Trail, and the blue area of the MCCOYS and Hogan's Creek watersheds. Next slide. So Groundwork Jacksonville raised private funds to develop the Emerald Trail Master Plan, which was adopted by the Jacksonville City Council in March of 2019. The numbers on the map are the order in which the trail segments will be designed and constructed. When complete, the Emerald Trail will be 30 miles of contiguous trails and linear parks, and includes the ecological restoration of MCCOYS and Hogan's Creeks. Hogan's Creeks are numbers 5 and 9 on the map, and MCCOYS Creek is the dotted light green line on the western end. And as you can see, the Emerald Trail is a major connector, connecting neighborhoods to each other, downtown, and the river, and to numerous schools and parks. Next slide. The success of this project requires an effective working relationship with the city and is a long-term partnership. The Emerald Trail will be a city park once constructed. Groundwork and the city will share programming and ongoing maintenance responsibility. Our funding agreement with the city is to split trail design costs 50-50, and the city pays construction costs. Groundwork funds the preliminary creek design plans and works to secure final design and construction grants. Both the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and NOAA awarded design grants to Groundwork Jacksonville for MCCOYS Creek. The cost sharing is actually more complex and nuanced than this slide indicates. Groundwork's role is to oversee trail and creek design and ensure all affected parties are at the table: residents, businesses, developers, public agencies, and to be the consistent getting us to the finish line leader of the project, ensuring the integrity and beauty of the Emerald Trail. Next slide. These are the guiding principles we convey to our trail design consultants. Some of the ways we can highlight neighborhoods are through wayfinding signage, storyboards, and art. Our urban core neighborhoods have such a rich history, and we want the trail to celebrate it. We see the Emerald Trail also as a 30-mile art gallery. Our first trail segment includes bioswales to clean stormwater runoff, and the second will direct runoff into bioplanters. These photos show that we are taking a 5-lane road down to 2 travel lanes to provide shade and slow down traffic. Next slide. Groundwork Jacksonville's approach to urban creek restoration is natural channel design. We want to create resilient, stable, and sustainable natural systems. As all of you know, and as Heather mentioned, spending time in nature is good for our overall well-being. The 2 creeks that are part of the Emerald Trail were straightened and hardened in the 1920s, currently flood, are polluted, and have no access to a floodplain, and are inhospitable to people and wildlife. We are designing these creeks to have multiple benefits. Next slide. Groundwork Jacksonville secured a $700,000 grant to develop a watershed plan for both the Hogan's and MCCOYS Creek watersheds. It will focus on green infrastructure solutions. The parcels in yellow are vacant, and the green parcels are city parks. There are a total of 856 acres of vacant land, with the city owning 43% of that. We'll be working with 10 neighborhoods located within the watersheds on this planning project. Next slide. Groundwork Jacksonville and the city have 2 projects under construction. The first trail segment is the top left photo. The trail is going through a city park here, and because it is, the Parks Department is improving the park with new basketball courts and a new playground. We're incorporating a large bioswale to capture and filter stormwater runoff. The MCCOYS Creek project also is under construction. We are improving an existing retention pond, and by that I mean adding a living shoreline and connecting it to the creek via a natural step pool channel instead of piping it directly into the creek. The photo on the bottom is the pond reconstructed. The second trail segment will be under construction in the second quarter of 2023. We just completed the preliminary design for the restoration of Hogan's Creek, and yesterday I submitted a $6 million grant request to the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation for final design and permitting, so fingers crossed on that grant. We're now under contract with the Florida Department of Economic Opportunity for the Watershed Plan, which is a 2-year project, and we'll begin designing trail segment number 3 later this year. And now I'm going to turn it over to Gloria.
At the core of our work is community engagement. The residents and stakeholders have been part of the partnership since the beginning of the Emerald Trail planning. A steering committee was created to inform and design the master trail plan. The committee membership included public agency representatives, business representatives, urban planners, and 5 neighborhood representatives. We also formed a neighborhood working group where all of the neighborhood organizations throughout the urban core were invited to join and share their issues and their desires for the trail. The neighborhood working group meetings were held on the evening after the steering committee meetings, and members received the same information. They provided feedback that was then shared with the steering committee. We also met periodically with the mayor's office to keep them apprised. The final draft design, which incorporated input from the community partners, was revealed at a public meeting where over 300 people were in attendance to provide their feedback. City council members and staff were also invited to an Emerald Trail presentation. An example of how community partners shared in the design decisions is the creation of the Model Mile segment. It was added later at the request of residents from Durkeeville and Newtown who want to be able to connect to downtown. Next slide, please. As mentioned earlier, 2 urban creeks are included in the Emerald Trail. Restoration of MCCOYS Creek was a COJ, City of Jacksonville, pre-programmed project. We led the creative design of MCCOYS Creek. We want to create a design that is informed by our residents, their experiences and history, and how they wish to define their neighborhoods. They are partners in decision-making. Next slide. Just to share some demographics, around MCCOYS Creek, there are 2 neighborhoods, Mixontown and our North Riverside in Brooklyn, but of course this focuses on Mixontown. Unfortunately, Brooklyn has been displaced some residents and fall into gentrification. So North Riverside is predominantly Black or African American, low income, and they are susceptible because of the high renter rate in the area. Next slide. MCCOYS Creek current conditions. The residents there have been plagued by flooding, failing infrastructure of the creek, pollution, and in this 30 acres of park area, there is only 1 playground and even access to it is limited. Next slide. So how do we engage North Riverside residents? Through community surveys, visioning sessions, Groundwork Jack's attendance at community meetings, creation of a MCCOYS Creek Task Force where 3 residents are members of the task force. Next slide, please. And this is a creek festival that showed the preliminary designs of MCCOYS Creek restoration. Residents were able to give their feedback and they were able to see where their input had been used in the preliminary designs. Next slide, please. Based on community feedback from surveys and one-on-one conversations, the community and Groundwork Jacksonville created the Community Restoration Environmental Stewardship Training Program, which we call CREST. It's easier to say. It is intergenerational. Environmental education is provided, field trips, leadership training, and job training. 6 of our adult stewards were trained water monitoring technicians who were paid for the work that they provided for their community. Next slide, please. Community engagement is ongoing. Residents were pleased to have MCCOYS Creek flooding addressed, but deeper engagement revealed the following concerns that you see here: displacement, home repair, infrastructure. They reside in a food desert. So all of those were also concerns. Next slide. The residents decided that they needed to create a community action plan that focused on equitable development. The North Riverside CDC partnered with Groundwork Jax and LISC to work on an equity plan. Listed here, you see the process for the equity planning, engagement training, creating a steering committee. It looked very well planned out, but some things did not go as planned with the training of the residents who they were expected to be involved in the neighborhood, going out doing interviews, but they just felt kind of shy around that. And the steering committee took that responsibility on and led the team on. So next slide. The steering committee met with residents. We had meetings. It culminated in a hybrid meeting, Zoom, in person, and they developed a 10-year vision for their community. There were 7 areas of major concern, and 4 were identified as priorities and urgent and needed to be taken care of to address anti-displacement. 4 community-led subcommittees were created to focus on these areas. So, next slide. So what are the next steps with the equity planning? An equity action plan was developed with the partners, with our resident partners, and it is in review, and certain aspects are being taken for action as we speak. So housing emerged as a top concern, the greatest way for people to be displaced from their community, with a home repair program, affordable housing, and home ownership being at the top of the concerns. We need to find the right partners. LISC has been an excellent partner for Groundwork as well as the residents of North Riverside, and they're working with us to develop a home repair program with the residents. Implementation of the plan, as I said earlier, is underway. A next initiative that is going to be beneficial and address the concerns of North Riverside residents is the creation of the Emerald Trail Stewards Program. Groundwork Jax will train and certify stewards to perform trail and creek maintenance. They will be residents of the urban core community. And as I said, it addresses concerns about employment opportunities where residents want careers and not just a job that they go to. Next slide. I want to leave with some takeaway points for us and for others who are in this work. Groundwork Jacksonville will continue to apply the equity lens on all of our work. Residents must be partners to make decisions about their communities. Transparency is necessary. Meet stakeholders where they are, and building trust takes time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And if I could have the presenters turn their cameras back on, we'll move into our Q&A session here. We do have a couple of questions in the queue, but folks, feel free to drop questions into the box and we'll get to those as we have time. We do have about 15 minutes or so for questions here. First question, Heather, this might be geared towards you, but I think some of you might be able to answer it in your experience in building a new trust, how does a new trust get started, and where does the funding come from?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as I mentioned very quickly in the presentation, it is through sort of what we call a competitive application process. So it is a multi-step process where we open up to communities to submit a letter of interest. And from there, we select a handful of communities to go on to the next step of developing a proposal. And then, only one or two are selected to the final round of creating essentially a business plan for a nonprofit. And those steps, particularly creating the business plan for the nonprofit, are funded through the partnership between EPA and the National Park Service, and our TCA staff and Groundwork USA staff provides support for that effort. And once a trust kind of goes through this full process and is established per a vote by the Groundwork USA board and the two federal partners, the National Park Service and EPA, they have access to a pot of funds for what we call seed funding. That is about $250,000 total. And they are also, as part of becoming a Groundwork Trust, they are also to bring in local government funds. So the local government usually commits at least $35,000 a year for the first 3 to 4 years. Because you can hear from the presentations from Groundwork Jacksonville and Groundwork Ohio River Valley, the city government and county government have a role in this kind of work too. And so we, as the federal partners, try to really stress the importance of having local government be at the table as funders in this work to help establish that nonprofit. That is like the quick version. There's more detail to that, and I'd be happy to follow up with more information for that person, Cass.
Perfect, yeah, and we'll drop a link in the chat. I think there is a whole section on the Groundwork USA website, if I'm not correct there, Heather, where you can, see what it takes to start your own new trust as well. Second question here is about this person's appreciation for community identified projects. It's really cool. Do you also address the local government identified needs? So for instance, if the county says we need this to happen, is that something where they look to Groundwork, your local Groundwork Trust, to help facilitate a project on the ground? Or is it all community driven?
I think that would be a great question for the trusts. Kay, or Kay, were you going to talk?
So the city had the MCCOYS, both MCCOYS and Hogan's Creek had been on the city's what's it called? LMS, local mitigation strategy, for decades. They were the #1 and 2 priorities. And when I started as CEO, they had funded the MCCOYS Creek project. And so, but they were only looking at it as a flood project. And on the western end of it, which is the Mixontown and North Riverside neighborhoods, they were going to close a road and let it flood, which wasn't adding any real value to the neighborhood. So we asked if we could design it, and they said okay. And so we hired experts at Natural Channel Design in Florida Creeks, and then worked with the neighborhood to get that project designed in a much more holistic way. We haven't gotten them yet. So again, we lead on our project, right? The Emerald Trail and Creek projects. The Jesse Ball DuPont Fund, which is kind of a national foundation, hired Groundwork to do community engagement for one of its projects, just because we do it differently and we have relationships in urban neighborhoods. We haven't necessarily gotten the city to hire us. We think they should hire us to do the engagement for any project happening in the urban core, but we're not there yet.
And Tanner and Jada.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great time to be talking about this. Our city is going through, we just kicked off the Green Cincinnati plan, which is their carbon reduction emissions playbook, the sustainability plan that will guide all of the city's processes to be carbon neutral by 2050. So in the background and in the build up to this, Jada, myself, and Climate Safe Neighborhoods team have been poking and prodding and pushing the city to include equity basically into all of this decision making. Number one, because it's the right thing to do, but number two, because it makes sense carbon emission wise to have the right solution in the right places. And the result of that has been us ghostwriting the ordinance to kick off this process, and then, as Kay said, them hiring us to do the engagement because we've convinced them through these climate safe neighborhoods groups that our engagement is the best around because of, again, what Kay said, it's relationship building, it's trust building, which you can't do via a contractor or some engagement process. You have to be on the ground and you have to take the years to build the trust and or comfort the neighborhoods. So that Green Cincinnati plan process is going to be a year-long effort. It's exciting to have the buy-in from the city right now, but it comes with a lot of hard work. And there's also a chicken and egg angle to this, whether it's projects first, it's engagements first. You have to have a showcase, you have to have momentum. What's the right way to go about it? It depends on your locality, your city.
Heather, did you want to add something to that answer?
No.
Okay.
I
Go ahead.
never mind. Keep going. I lost the picture, so I can't see you all.
Oh dear. Okay. Just two more questions here in the queue. Jada, this might be geared towards you because you were talking about the youth employees. I think you said 80 youth employees that you're getting ready to bring on. Do you ever take that crew on the road and kind of show other communities the power of groundwork? And, you know, or are you guys isolated to like, this is my boundary, I can't go beyond it?
That's a great question. We actually have, I think, 9 different teams all throughout the city of Cincinnati. So they're all like intermingling with each other and viewing different parts of the city. And then towards the end of the summer, we try to do a national parks trip or get them somewhere outside of Cincinnati. So last year I took 7 kids out to Yellowstone National Park, and we got to work with Groundwork USA there and just view a whole different side of the country that a lot of kids like had never camped before and never traveled before. So we really just try to give them a trip to like celebrate them getting out and doing the work and allowing them to see a different part of the country.
I'll add in regionally as well. We're in a tri-state area, so it's Northern Kentucky, Southwest Ohio, Southeast Indiana, and through different partnerships, which might be a grant foundation or might just be some shared values, we take them out and to this question, kind of show the power of them because they are always underestimated and always do more than anybody has set up. And what that results in are cities like Cleveland calling us up, asking to start a groundwork or like start a green team program or something like that. Throughout Northern Kentucky, we do work again in Indiana and all over the Southwest Ohio region with different counties and municipalities. So to Jada's point, the kids get to experience their connection to a place like Yellowstone or someplace closer, like the edge of Appalachia, the southeast Ohio, which is still quite marvelous, but then also bring it back home and kind of showcase that region.
Okay, Gloria, do you guys have any crews that you take on the road to neighboring communities to show the power of groundwork?
Well, with our field trips with the CREST group, what we do, we go to areas that may have been brownfield zones previously that have been rehabilitated so that they can see the opportunity for their community as well, what MCCOYS Creek can become. And so that's what we do. Like we have the Jacksonville Arboretum, which used to be a dump site and now is beautiful, a great attraction to the city. And even going to the zoo where they've learned some leadership aspects and working with the youth group at the zoo so that they share information. And that's some of the things that we've done. Chanel's not here to talk about our green team, but they have been doing some pretty great things as well.
Awesome. This is also inspiring. I'm based out of Yosemite, like just outside of Yosemite. So if you ever need a field trip to a national park, please let me know. I'd be happy to help coordinate things there for you guys. Last question here. This person saying that they love that this is a partnership between Groundwork, local communities, EPA, NPS, but they're curious about where the data comes from. Are you all collecting data? Is it data that you're given to by the Park Service and the EPA, or, you know, how are you using kind of the data to support the needs on the ground?
I can jump in and then pass to Jada. So the answer is all of the above. They may know there's a lot of publicly available data. Of course, we've had a special partnership through NPS with NASA Develop, which allows us to go a little deeper. And then Climate Safe Neighborhoods really encourages and funds and advocates for residents and young folks to go deeper by collecting their own data. We all know, if you live in these neighborhoods, we all know the story. We don't know what's going on, but the data helps make the case, helps push for policy and procedures. And Jada can talk a little bit about that, but a lot of it's publicly available GIS data. It's just telling the story. And I say to the EPA all the time, we use EJ Screen like every day. The thing that we do that's different is make it more accessible. And when people understand it, then they can use it more, than they can advocate more. Jada can talk about air quality or water quality or whatever else.
That was a very thorough answer, Tanner. But yeah, I would say that we love data here at Groundwork ORB. Like that dashboard that I showed from the Summer Green Team, it's very powerful when you're showing it to like different people throughout the neighborhood or even the city of Cincinnati, just to say like, this is the work that we've done. Like, if you're showing to funders, like this is what you're funding, let us keep doing this. And also with like the air quality program that we have in Lower Price Hill, we have a live map that shows like live action data being collected from all 12 monitors, and just sharing that with the businesses who allowed us to host those monitors. They're like, oh wow, like this is awesome. We're happy to be involved. So I would just say that data is extremely powerful and people love to see it.
That dashboard is very cool. Okay, Gloria, comments on data?
Well, we use a lot of census data, and we also, with the Florida system, we have a good health indicators sharing that is very accessible, and it provides information that's very valuable. And for us with tracking housing concerns, we've started using Kay, I talk about it all the time, Regrid. I'm sure you've heard of Regrid, and I've looked into EJ Screen, and after hearing Tanner and Jada talk about it, I should investigate it more. It sounds like a very useful tool. I've attended some of the presentations on it, so thank you for that feedback. Kay may remember something that I'm forgetting. She's like, no.
Cass, if there aren't any other questions, I wanted to kind of chime in on some of the questions we've taken on. So one person asked about this, city goals, and I would also share that, having a Groundwork Trust in many cases is a goal of the city. So one of our newest Groundwork Trusts, Groundwork Erie, that was actually a priority for the city to have a trust there. Who could work in partnership with them and the local community on creating a greenway from former industrial sites, and also do some deeper youth work, and also work to kind of repair some of the difficult relationships that the city had with the Black community in Erie. And I think we could go down the list of all 22 trusts and highlight how trusts are serving city goals in numerous ways. And then there was another question about trusts on the road, and just wanted to flag that many of the trusts and their green teams are working in national parks across the country. Groundwork USA has a youth agreement and helps kind of coordinate those relationships. But currently there's green teams working at the Martin Luther King National Historical Site in Tuskegee on historic preservation related trade projects. Timaquan is close to Jacksonville. The green team has gone out there to help with educational programs. We have a long relationship to Groundwork USA with Yellowstone and Glacier. And these are all kind of paid youth development opportunities to work on skill building around trade and green infrastructure, but also for them to get a chance to visit a park that they might have never been to and learn a little bit about what it's like to be a visitor and also to work in a national park. So Cass, if you have an opportunity at Yosemite, we should chat.
Yeah, definitely. Well, this has been really great and again, very inspiring. Thank you so much to each of you for sharing your incredible work. And again, this has been recorded today, so we will post it shortly after the presentation. So folks, if you're still tuning in, this does conclude our environmental justice series that we've been hosting for the last several months. We do have additional connected conservation webinars that are coming up that have a different focus. It'll be focused more on conservation that you can do at home or closer to home. And so, which kind of aligns actually with our topic today too. So kind of a good little segue into our next series that's coming up. We dropped a few links in the chat there, so feel free to open those up and save those. If you're interested in learning more about Groundwork as well as the Connected Conservation Community of Practice, we dropped a link to an example of a story map as well. And to Tanner, Jada, Kay, and Gloria, thank you so much for your time and your expertise and sharing your work with us. And Heather, thanks to you for helping to organize this webinar today.
Yeah, great presentations, team. Loved it.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.